I stood at my father's annual 4th of July barbecue holding my paper plate, as my 12-year-old nephew Tyler smirked and announced, "Charity cases eat last," while the entire family erupted in laughter. My brother David high-fived Tyler. My sister-in-law Amanda wiped tears from laughing, and even my 70-year-old father Frank chuckled while flipping burgers. I set my plate down on the picnic table, the sound of ceramic hitting wood cutting through their amusement. Without a word, I walked toward my truck, hearing my sister Jennifer call out mockingly, "Come on, Kent, it's just a joke." The drive home to my modest apartment felt like a funeral procession, every red light giving me more time to replay that moment when my own family treated me like some kind of burden they tolerated out of obligation. Tyler's words kept echoing in my head, but what hurt more was the genuine amusement in everyone's voices. Like watching me get humiliated was the highlight of their afternoon entertainment. As I pulled into the parking lot of my simple 2-bedroom apartment complex, I thought about how this perception had been building for the past 2 years since my divorce from Stephanie. My family had watched me move from our suburban house to this modest place, drive my old pickup truck instead of the luxury sedan I used to own, and wear casual clothes instead of expensive suits. What they didn't understand was that every single one of those changes had been my choice, not my circumstance. The truth was something I'd been keeping to myself since the divorce proceedings ended. While my family assumed Stephanie had cleaned me out in the settlement, the reality was far different. I'd actually retained most of my assets by structuring them through my business entities before we separated. The modest lifestyle wasn't forced on me by financial ruin. It was a deliberate decision to live simply and see people's true character without the complications that wealth brings to relationships. My phone started buzzing with text messages before I even made it through my front door. Jennifer had written, "Seriously, Kent, you're being way too sensitive. Tyler's just a kid." David added his own commentary. "Maybe if you developed a sense of humor about your situation, family gatherings would be more fun for everyone." Even my mother Patricia chimed in with her particular brand of concerned guilt. "Sweetheart, come back. I saved you a burger and some of that potato salad you like." Each message made my chest tighten with a combination of anger and disappointment. They genuinely believed they were being kind by tolerating my presence at family events, like I should be grateful for their charity and including me, despite my supposed financial failures. What made it worse was remembering all the small humiliations they'd subjected me to over the past 24 months, each one delivered with a smile and framed as helping family. There was the time at Jennifer's birthday dinner when Patricia loudly insisted on paying my portion of the bill at the restaurant, announcing to the entire table that Kent shouldn't worry about money right now. Or when David cornered me at Christmas to offer me a great opportunity, working for his insurance company, explaining that sometimes we have to swallow our pride and take what's available. The worst had been when Frank pulled me aside at Easter and whispered that he understood if I couldn't contribute to Tyler's baseball league fundraiser because everyone knows divorce lawyers take everything. Each incident had chipped away at my dignity, while they convinced themselves they were being supportive. They'd created this narrative where I was the family project, the cautionary tale about what happens when life goes wrong, and they were the generous relatives keeping me afloat through tough times. The irony was almost laughable, except laughing was the last thing I felt like doing. Sitting in my living room, I looked around at the modest furniture and simple decorations that my family interpreted as signs of financial struggle. The truth was that I'd furnished this place deliberately to maintain my low profile. Every piece had been chosen for comfort and functionality, not because I couldn't afford better. The expensive artwork was in storage, the luxury electronics were unnecessary for my current lifestyle, and the designer furniture would have sent the wrong message about my actual circumstances. My business, Morrison Capital Partners, specialized in acquiring and restructuring distressed family companies. The irony of sharing the same last name with my family's construction business had never been lost on me, though we were completely unrelated to Morrison and Sons building contractors. Over the past 5 years, my firm had grown to manage over $50 million in assets, with a reputation for ethical practices and successful turnarounds of struggling businesses. The modest apartment served as perfect camouflage for my real life. During business hours, I worked from our downtown offices, meeting with clients and investors in conference rooms with city views. My business partner, Rachel, handled most of the day-to-day operations, allowing me to maintain flexibility in my schedule and privacy in my personal life. After the divorce, I discovered that keeping my wealth quiet eliminated a lot of complicated social dynamics and helped me identify people who valued me for my character rather than my bank account. Unfortunately, my strategy had worked too well with my own family. They'd become so convinced of my poverty that they'd started treating me like a charity case complete with the condescending kindness and casual cruelty that often accompanies such arrangements. Tonight's barbecue had been the final straw, the moment when their perception of me as a family burden had been articulated clearly by a 12-year-old who'd obviously learned those attitudes from the adults around him. As evening approached, I found myself thinking about Tyler's comment and wondering where he'd learned to categorize people as charity cases in the first place. Kids don't develop that kind of class consciousness naturally. They absorb it from watching how the adults in their lives treat different people. Tyler had been watching his parents and grandparents interact with me for 2 years, learning that Uncle Kent was someone who could be mocked safely because he needed their help and couldn't afford to fight back. The realization hit me that I'd accidentally taught my family the wrong lesson about resilience and humility. By accepting their condescension gracefully, I'd reinforced their belief that I was grateful for their tolerance. By not correcting their assumptions about my finances, I'd allowed them to create a dynamic where they felt superior, and I played the role of the grateful recipient of their generosity. My phone buzzed again with another message from Frank. Son family sticks together through good times and bad. Don't let pride keep you away from people who love you. The message would have been touching if it weren't based on a completely false understanding of the situation. Frank thought he was reaching out to a struggling family member who needed emotional support. He had no idea he was lecturing a successful businessman who had just been publicly humiliated by his own relatives. I spent the rest of the evening wondering how long this dynamic might have continued if Tyler hadn't articulated it so clearly. Would I have kept playing the role of the grateful poor relation indefinitely? Would my family have continued their patronizing kindness until it became a permanent fixture of our relationship? The thought of enduring years more of their charitable condescension made my stomach turn. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being their charity case, done accepting their version of who I was supposed to be, and definitely done pretending that their casual cruelty was acceptable because it came wrapped in family love. Tomorrow, I would start showing them exactly who Kent Morrison really was, and more importantly, what their charity case could actually do when pushed too far. The next morning brought an unexpected text message that changed everything. At 11:43 p.m., my phone had buzzed with a message from Frank. The business needs your investment. Can we talk tomorrow? I stared at the screen for several minutes, trying to process the audacity of asking for money from someone they'd been treating like a financial burden for 2 years. The timing felt almost deliberately cruel, coming just hours after Tyler's public humiliation and their collective laughter at my expense. Unable to sleep, I spent most of the night using my professional resources to investigate Morrison and Sons building contractors. What I discovered through industry databases and my network of contacts painted a picture of a family business in complete freefall. The company owed $253,000 to various suppliers, faced 3 active lawsuits from clients claiming project delays and cost overruns, and had lost their most lucrative contract when a shopping center development went 60% over budget. By 6 a.m., I was parked across the street from the Morrison and Sons offices, watching the daily drama unfold through my truck windows. David arrived first, immediately confronting two men in hard hats who appeared to be demanding payment for delivered materials. Even from a distance, I could see David's animated gestures and frustrated body language as he tried to negotiate with increasingly angry creditors. Jennifer showed up 20 minutes later, talking frantically on her phone while pacing back and forth in the parking lot. Through my passenger window, I watched her expression cycle through panic, desperation, and exhaustion as she handled what appeared to be multiple crisis calls simultaneously. Every few minutes, she would stop pacing to write notes on a pad, her pen moving rapidly as she documented whatever disasters were being reported from the other end of her conversations. Frank's arrival was the most telling. My 70-year-old father walked slowly from his car to the office entrance, his shoulders slumped and his normally confident stride replaced by the careful movements of someone carrying an enormous burden. Through the office windows, I could see him settle at his desk and immediately bury his head in his hands, surrounded by stacks of papers that I assumed were unpaid bills and legal documents. Using my business connections, I spent the morning making discreet inquiries about Morrison and Sons' reputation in the local construction industry. The feedback was uniformly negative. Suppliers described the company as unreliable. With payments, subcontractors complained about delayed compensation that forced them to pursue legal action. And former clients shared stories of projects that went dramatically over budget due to poor management and communication failures. My former college roommate, now a commercial loan officer at First National Bank, provided the most disturbing information during our lunch meeting. "Kent, your dad has been in here 4 times in the past 6 months, trying to extend credit lines and restructure existing loans. The last time he mentioned that his successful son would be co-signing some of the agreements once you recovered from your divorce settlement. We've been holding off on foreclosure procedures because Frank keeps insisting you'll be investing in the company soon." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. While my family was publicly treating me like a charity case at barbecues and family dinners, Frank had been privately using my supposed future investment as collateral to buy time with creditors and lenders. He'd been telling business partners that his financially successful son Kent would eventually bail out Morrison and Sons, all while laughing at Tyler's jokes about charity cases eating last. I spent the afternoon making more calls and discovered that Frank's manipulation extended far beyond bank conversations. He'd been telling suppliers that delayed payments would be resolved once his investor son got back on his feet financially. Equipment rental companies had extended terms because Frank assured them his business partner's son would cover outstanding balances as soon as his divorce complications were resolved. The most infuriating discovery came from David's former supervisor at the insurance company where he'd worked before joining Morrison and Sons. David quit last year claiming his brother was bringing major investment capital to the family construction business. He said Kent was some kind of financial expert who would modernize their operations and expand into commercial development. We offered David a promotion to stay, but he insisted the construction company was about to become a major regional player thanks to his brother's involvement. By evening, I had assembled a complete picture of Morrison and Sons' financial situation and my family's coordinated deception. They owed money to 17 different suppliers, had defaulted on 2 equipment loans, and faced potential bankruptcy within 90 days if they couldn't generate significant cash flow. Meanwhile, they'd been telling everyone in their business network that I was their secret weapon, the financial savior who would rescue their failing company once my personal situation stabilized. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. At family gatherings, they treated me like someone who needed their charity and support. In their business dealings, they promoted me as a wealthy investor who would solve their financial problems. They'd created 2 completely different versions of who I was, switching between them based on what served their needs in any given situation. That evening, I received another text from Frank. "Can you meet me at Denny's tomorrow at 10 a.m. just to talk about possibilities?" Nothing formal. The message's casual tone infuriated me more than any direct demand might have. Frank was approaching me like he was doing me a favor by including me in business discussions when he'd actually been leveraging my supposed involvement to keep his failing company afloat for months. I spent that night researching the specific suppliers and creditors that Morrison & Sons owed money to, developing a clear understanding of who held their debts and how those obligations might be transferred or acquired. As a private equity specialist, I understood exactly how debt acquisition worked and what leverage it could provide in restructuring or controlling a distressed business. My anger had evolved beyond personal hurt into professional fascination. My family had unknowingly created the perfect setup for a hostile takeover of their own business. They'd spent months telling creditors that Kent Morrison was their financial backer, never imagining that Kent Morrison actually had the resources and expertise to acquire their debts and become their primary creditor overnight. The irony was almost artistic. They wanted Kent Morrison the investor to save Morrison & Sons, while treating Kent Morrison the family member like a burden they tolerated out of obligation. Tomorrow morning's meeting would be my first opportunity to show them that Kent Morrison the investor and Kent Morrison the family member were the same person, and that person was done being anyone's charity case. As I prepared for bed, I realized that Frank's text message had accomplished something Tyler's barbecue comment never could have. It had given me a legitimate business reason to get involved in their affairs, with full legal justification for any actions I might choose to take. They'd invited me into their financial crisis. Now they would discover exactly what kind of investor they'd been claiming as their secret partner all along. Frank chose a corner booth at Denny's where we could talk privately, his weathered hands fidgeting with a coffee cup that he'd barely touched since ordering. The man who'd laughed at Tyler's charity case comment less than 48 hours ago now looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes bloodshot and his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy that made him seem older than his 70 years. "Kent, I need to be completely honest with you about something." Frank began, his voice carrying a tremor I'd never heard before. "The business is in serious trouble, real trouble. I know you've been struggling since the divorce, but maybe you could find some way to help us. We need approximately $300,000, and I've been hoping maybe you could take out a loan or use some of your divorce settlement." I sipped my coffee and watched Frank's face as he delivered his rehearsed speech. Every word had been carefully chosen to make me feel both needed and guilty, implying that helping Morrison & Sons would somehow benefit me as much as them. The manipulation was so obvious that I wondered how I'd missed similar tactics in our past conversations. "I've already spoken with the whole family about this." Frank continued, revealing the coordinated nature of their approach. "Your mother suggested maybe you could use your divorce settlement or take out a second mortgage on your apartment. Jennifer thinks you might have some retirement savings you could access. We're not asking for charity, son. This would be a real investment opportunity." Frank slid a manila folder across the table, and I opened it to find loan applications already filled out in my name. Every line had been completed except for my signature, with Frank having provided my Social Security number, employment history, and estimated income based on what he assumed my financial situation looked like. The presumption was staggering. I took the liberty of getting the paperwork started. Frank explained, apparently unaware that preparing loan documents without someone's permission might be considered problematic. The bank said, with your credit history from before the divorce, you might still qualify for a substantial personal loan. You'd just need to sign here, and we could have funding within a week. As I read through the applications, Frank launched into his emotional manipulation strategy. "I remember when you were 8 years old and wanted that blue Schwinn bicycle for Christmas. Your mother and I worked double shifts for 3 months to save up the money because we knew how much it meant to you. I never asked for anything back then, and I'm not really asking for me now. This is about preserving the family name, securing Tyler's future, and giving Jennifer's kids something to be proud of. The bicycle story was particularly galling because Frank had already used it on me twice in the past year, once when asking me to contribute to Tyler's baseball team, and again when requesting help with Patricia's medical bills. He'd recycled his emotional manipulation so often that he apparently couldn't remember which stories he'd already deployed against which targets. I know it's scary to take on debt when you're already struggling financially. Frank continued, his voice becoming more desperate with each sentence. But this could be your chance to be part of something bigger than yourself again. Remember how proud you used to be when people knew you were successful. This investment could help rebuild your reputation while saving the family business. Frank's words revealed his complete misunderstanding of my current situation and priorities. He assumed I missed being recognized for my wealth and status when I'd actually chosen anonymity and simplicity as preferable alternatives to the complications that accompanied public success. His entire pitch was based on offering me things I'd already rejected in favor of a different way of living. Your brother David thinks you might be too proud to ask for help, Frank said, delivering what he clearly considered his strongest argument. But I told him, you're a good son who understands sacrifice. You're not like some people who abandon family when things get difficult. You understand that family comes first even when it requires personal sacrifice. The comparison to unspecified people who abandon family was obviously meant to make me feel guilty about any reluctance to bankrupt myself for Morrison and Sons. Frank had positioned my potential refusal to take on crushing debt as equivalent to abandoning the family entirely, leaving me no middle ground between financial suicide and family betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. Did you ask him yet? Remember what we talked about regarding making him feel needed rather than pitied. Frank glanced at my phone screen, and his expression confirmed that the entire family had coordinated this approach, planning exactly which emotional buttons to push and which manipulation strategies to employ. What specific business problems does Morrison and Sons face? I asked, shifting the conversation toward concrete details. Frank's response revealed the depth of their troubles and his shocking lack of understanding about what had caused them. Well, we've had some cash flow issues since David joined the company full-time, Frank admitted reluctantly. That shopping center project went over budget when David miscalculated the foundation requirements. The client is demanding a $50,000 penalty payment, which triggered some late fees with our suppliers. David's still learning the construction business, but he's got great ideas for expanding our services. Frank's casual dismissal of David's costly mistakes as learning experiences showed exactly why Morrison and Sons was failing. David had quit a stable insurance job to join a construction company where he had no experience or training, and Frank had given him responsibility for major projects without proper supervision or education. The $50,000 penalty wasn't bad luck. It was the predictable result of putting an unqualified person in charge of complex construction operations. We also lost our business insurance when we missed a few premium payments. Frank continued, apparently unaware that operating a construction company without proper insurance was both illegal and financially suicidal. And some of our equipment got repossessed when we couldn't make the monthly payments. But those are just temporary setbacks. Once we get some working capital, we can resolve all these issues quickly. Frank's explanations revealed a pattern of cascading failures caused by poor management and wishful thinking rather than bad luck or market conditions. They'd defaulted on insurance payments, lost essential equipment, and faced legal penalties, all while Frank convinced himself these were minor problems that money could easily solve. The most important thing, Frank concluded, is that we act quickly. Some of our creditors are getting impatient and we can't afford to lose more suppliers. But if you could help us with this loan, we'd be back on solid footing within 6 months. You'd get your money back with interest, plus you'd have the satisfaction of knowing you saved the family business. Frank's timeline was pure fantasy. Companies facing the problems he described don't recover in 6 months. They usually require years of careful management and significant operational changes to become profitable again. His promise that I'd be repaid quickly was either deliberate deception or dangerous self-delusion. As Frank finished his pitch, I realized he genuinely believed he was offering me an opportunity, rather than asking me to sacrifice my financial security for his family's benefit. In his mind, the chance to invest in Morrison & Sons was a gift he was generously providing to his struggling son, not a desperate plea for help from a failing business owner. The meeting ended with Frank's expectation that I would take the loan applications home to consider them seriously. Just think about it, son. Family helping family. That's what we do for each other. His final words carried the implied threat that refusing would mark me as someone who doesn't prioritize family relationships, completing his manipulation strategy with emotional blackmail disguised as moral guidance. Driving home from Denny's, I understood that Frank's request had inadvertently provided me with everything I needed to take decisive action. He'd revealed Morrison & Sons' complete financial situation, demonstrated the family's coordinated manipulation tactics, and handed me legal documents showing exactly how they planned to exploit my supposed desperation. Most importantly, he'd shown me that they viewed me as both their financial salvation and their emotional victim, a contradiction that would soon become impossible to maintain. The next 48 hours transformed me from an angry family member into a focused business professional, conducting the most important acquisition research of my career. Working from my firm's downtown offices for the first time in months, I assembled a complete picture of Morrison & Sons' business relationships, debt structure, and market reputation, using resources my family couldn't imagine I possessed. My business partner, Rachel, immediately understood the strategic implications when I explained the situation. You want to acquire their debts before revealing your identity. That's brilliant, Kent. They'll discover they've been manipulating their own biggest creditor while treating him like a charity case. The irony is almost perfect. Using Morrison Capital Partners' legal team and private investigation resources, we began systematically documenting every aspect of my family's financial crisis and the lies they'd told to extend their credit relationships. The private investigator, Marcus Webb, specialized in corporate fraud investigations and approached the project with professional thoroughness that uncovered details I never would have discovered independently. Within 24 hours, Marcus had obtained recorded phone conversations between David and 3 different potential investors, all featuring David's promises that his brother, the equity specialist, would guarantee their investments in Morrison & Sons. In one particularly damaging recording, David told a commercial development company, "Kent's just playing things close to the vest until his divorce settlement finalizes. Once he's ready to go public with his involvement, you'll see Morrison & Sons become a major regional player overnight." The recordings revealed that David had scheduled meetings with investors for the following week, planning to surprise me by announcing my participation in deals I'd never agreed to participate in. He'd created a scenario where my refusal to honor his commitments would make me appear unreliable and dishonest to legitimate business partners who might have offered real opportunities for Morrison & Sons. Even more disturbing, Marcus discovered email exchanges between Amanda and Jennifer, planning Tyler's Charity Cases Eat Last comment as psychological preparation for Frank's investment request. Amanda had written, "Tyler practicing his joke about poor people is hilarious. It'll put Kent in the right mindset to be grateful when Frank offers him a chance to be useful to the family again." Jennifer's response was equally revealing. Perfect timing. If Kent feels bad about being a burden at the barbecue, he'll be more motivated to prove his value by helping with the business crisis. Dad says the guilt approach works better than direct requests with Kent because he's naturally eager to please. The email evidence proved that Tyler's humiliating comment wasn't spontaneous childhood cruelty. It was a coordinated adult manipulation designed to make me feel grateful for any opportunity to redeem myself in the family's eyes. They'd used a 12-year-old child to deliver psychological warfare against his own uncle, teaching Tyler that cruelty could be a useful tool for controlling other people's behavior. Marcus also uncovered the extent of my family's lies about my supposed financial struggles within their social and business circles. Patricia had been telling her church prayer group that I was learning humility through financial hardship and requesting prayers for my spiritual growth through adversity. Jennifer had informed her real estate clients that her brother was rebuilding his life after losing everything in a divorce, and asked for referrals to anyone who might need bookkeeping or consulting services. Most painfully, Frank had been sharing details about my supposed poverty, with his golf buddies describing my fall from grace as a cautionary tale about overconfidence and poor financial planning. According to Marcus's sources, Frank regularly used my situation as an example of why successful people should remain humble and maintain family relationships regardless of their financial status. The contradiction between my family's public narrative and their private expectations became even more stark when Marcus obtained Frank's conversations with Morrison and Sons creditors. Frank had been telling suppliers that payment delays were temporary because his investor son would be providing significant capital injection once his personal situation stabilized. Equipment rental companies had extended terms because Frank assured them his business partner's son would guarantee all outstanding obligations. Through careful analysis of these recorded conversations and documented communications, we discovered that my family had created two completely incompatible versions of my circumstances. To justify their condescending treatment at family gatherings, they promoted me as a struggling divorced man who needed their charity and support. To maintain creditor relationships and avoid bankruptcy, they described me as a wealthy investor who would soon rescue Morrison and Sons from financial ruin. The legal implications were staggering. Frank had essentially committed fraud by misrepresenting my involvement in Morrison and Sons to creditors and potential business partners. David had scheduled meetings based on promises he couldn't deliver, creating potential liability for breach of contract and misrepresentation. Jennifer's real estate activities included soliciting business opportunities using false information about my circumstances, which could jeopardize her professional license. Rachel and our legal team began preparing documentation for debt acquisition procedures, while Marcus continued gathering evidence of my family's deceptive practices. We identified every supplier, creditor, and service provider that Morrison and Sons owed money to, along with the specific amounts and payment schedules for each obligation. The most valuable discovery was that most of Morrison and Sons' creditors were small local businesses who needed immediate cash flow more than they needed to collect the full amounts owed. Our preliminary inquiries revealed that many suppliers would be willing to sell their outstanding invoices for 60 to 70 cents on the dollar, allowing them to resolve cash flow problems immediately while transferring legal ownership of the debts to Morrison Capital Partners. By Friday afternoon, we had assembled a comprehensive acquisition strategy that would make me Morrison and Sons' primary creditor within a week. The plan involved purchasing their outstanding debts at discounted rates from frustrated suppliers, acquiring the promissory notes Frank had signed with private lenders, and buying the defaulted equipment loans from the finance companies that had already repossessed some of their construction machinery. The beauty of the strategy was its complete legality and business legitimacy. Debt acquisition is a standard practice in corporate restructuring, and my family had inadvertently positioned themselves as ideal targets by owing money to multiple small creditors who needed immediate payment. By becoming their primary creditor, I would gain legal authority to demand immediate payment or seize company assets as collateral, giving me complete control over Morrison and Sons' future operations. Marcus's final report included detailed documentation of my family's coordinated deception, recorded evidence of their manipulation tactics, and legal analysis of their fraudulent representations to creditors and business partners. The evidence was so comprehensive that it could support civil litigation if I chose to pursue legal remedies for their misrepresentation of my involvement in their business affairs. As I reviewed the investigation results, I realized my family had unknowingly provided me with everything needed to teach them a lesson about respect, honesty, and the consequences of treating family members as expendable resources. They'd created the perfect scenario for demonstrating exactly what Kent Morrison was capable of accomplishing when he stopped pretending to be their charity case and started behaving like the successful businessman he actually was. The weekend would be my last opportunity to finalize the debt acquisition strategy before revealing my true identity and capabilities to my family. By Monday morning, Morrison and Sons would discover that their financial crisis had just become significantly more complicated, and their most important creditor was someone they'd been treating like a burden they tolerated out of family obligation. Monday morning brought the culmination of everything I'd been planning since walking out of that barbecue. Working from Morrison Capital Partners' downtown offices, I coordinated the most complex debt acquisition strategy our firm had ever executed, knowing that by the end of the day I would own my family's financial future. Rachel had spent the weekend finalizing purchase agreements with Morrison and Sons creditors, and her efficiency was remarkable. Kent, we've successfully acquired 87% of their outstanding obligations. She reported, spreading legal documents across our conference table. 17 suppliers sold us their invoices at an average of 63 cents on the dollar. The equipment finance company accepted 75 cents on the dollar for the defaulted machinery loans. Even the private lenders Frank borrowed from were eager to transfer the promissory notes rather than pursue collection procedures. The numbers were staggering. For an investment of less than $200,000, Morrison Capital Partners now owned $297,000 in legal debt obligations from Morrison and Sons building contractors. We had essentially purchased control of my family's business for a fraction of what they actually owed, giving us complete authority to demand immediate payment or seize company assets. Our legal team had prepared comprehensive documentation, establishing Morrison Capital Partners as the primary creditor with rights to initiate collection procedures, asset seizure, and potentially force bankruptcy proceedings if the debts weren't satisfied within 30 days. Every transaction was perfectly legal and professionally executed following standard industry practices for distressed debt acquisition. The beautiful part, Rachel explained, is that your family's own misrepresentations about your involvement helped us complete these acquisitions. Several creditors mentioned that Frank had told them his investor's son would eventually guarantee these obligations, so they were actually relieved to sell the debts to an established equity firm rather than continue pursuing collection from a failing construction company. Marcus had prepared detailed portfolios documenting Morrison and Sons' business relationships, my family's deceptive practices, and the evidence of their coordinated manipulation campaign. The portfolios included transcripts of recorded conversations, copies of fraudulent representations to creditors, and documented proof of their psychological warfare tactics against me personally. The final element of our strategy involved carefully timing the delivery of legal notices to maximize their emotional and psychological impact. Rather than simply mailing documents, we arranged for professional process servers to deliver comprehensive packages simultaneously to Morrison and Sons offices, Frank's residence, David's home, and Jennifer's real estate office. Each package contained multiple documents: formal notice of debt transfer to Morrison Capital Partners, demand for immediate payment of outstanding obligations, detailed schedules of assets subject to potential seizure, and comprehensive information about our firm's capabilities and track record. The coordinated delivery would ensure my entire family learned about their new reality at exactly the same time, preventing them from developing coordinated responses or manipulation strategies. Rachel had also prepared detailed financial profiles of Morrison Capital Partners, including photographs of our offices, credentials of our staff, and documentation of our successful acquisitions and business turnarounds. This information would help my family understand exactly who they'd been treating as their charity case, while depending on his fictional involvement to maintain their creditor relationships. I've never seen someone accidentally create such perfect conditions for their own hostile takeover, Rachel observed as we reviewed the final documentation. They spent months telling creditors that Kent Morrison was their financial backer, never imagining that Kent Morrison actually had the resources to acquire their debts and control their company overnight. The irony was indeed remarkable. My family had unknowingly provided me with complete information about their financial vulnerabilities, while positioning me as both their salvation and their victim. They'd created two contradictory narratives about my circumstances, and now they would discover that the successful investor they'd been promising to creditors was the same person they'd been treating like a family burden. As our team finalized preparations for Monday's coordinated delivery, I reflected on how this situation had evolved from personal hurt into professional opportunity. My family's manipulation and deception had taught them to see me as someone who could be exploited safely, but they were about to learn that exploiting a private equity specialist while misrepresenting his involvement in your business affairs was a remarkably dangerous mistake. The weekend provided my last opportunity to consider alternative approaches. I could have simply revealed my wealth and success without acquiring their debts, but that would have allowed them to maintain their victim mentality while potentially continuing their manipulative behavior. I could have offered direct financial assistance, but that would have reinforced their belief that I was available to solve problems they'd created through poor decisions and dishonest practices. Instead, the debt acquisition strategy would force them to confront the consequences of their actions while providing clear evidence that their assumptions about my capabilities were completely wrong. They would learn simultaneously that I didn't need their charity and that they desperately needed my professional expertise to avoid financial ruin. Sunday evening, I drove past my modest apartment complex one final time before moving to my actual residence in the upscale Meadowbrook neighborhood. The apartment had served its purpose as camouflage for my real lifestyle, but maintaining that deception was no longer necessary or beneficial. Tomorrow, my family would discover exactly who Kent Morrison really was, and pretending to be their charity case would become impossible. I packed the few personal belongings I'd kept at the apartment, symbolically closing the chapter of my life where I'd allowed other people's assumptions to define my role in their narratives. The simple furniture and basic electronics would be donated to charity, while the expensive items I'd kept in storage would be returned to my actual home. As I looked around the empty apartment for the last time, I realized that this space had represented more than just affordable housing. It had been my refuge from the complications of wealth, my experiment in living simply, and my unintentional laboratory for observing how people treated those they perceived as less successful than themselves. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a completely different relationship with my family, one based on honesty rather than assumptions, respect rather than condescension, and genuine business partnerships rather than manipulative charity arrangements. They were about to learn that the charity case they'd been laughing at was actually the successful businessman they'd been lying about to their creditors, and that person was no longer willing to tolerate their treatment or enable their deceptive practices. The next morning would bring the reckoning my family had unknowingly been preparing for since that moment when Tyler announced that charity cases eat last, and everyone found it hilarious. Their laughter was about to turn into something very different when they discovered exactly what their charity case was capable of accomplishing. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a military operation. At exactly 9 a.m., professional couriers delivered identical packages to Morrison and Sons Construction, Frank's house on Maple Street, David's residence in the Riverside development, and Jennifer's Century 21 real estate office downtown. The timing was calculated to ensure my entire family received their new reality simultaneously, preventing any opportunity for them to coordinate responses or develop unified manipulation strategies. Frank opened his package first at the Morrison and Sons office, his weathered hands trembling as he read the formal letterhead of Morrison Capital Partners. The demand letter was professionally written but unambiguous. Notice is hereby given that Morrison Capital Partners has acquired the outstanding obligations of Morrison and Sons Building Contractors, totaling $297,462. Immediate payment is required within 30 days of this notice or collection procedures will commence as permitted by law. David received his documents while drinking coffee in his kitchen, nearly spilling the hot liquid when he saw his name listed as a personal guarantor on equipment loans that had been transferred to an unknown equity firm. The legal language was clear and terrifying. His house could be subject to lien procedures if the corporate debts weren't satisfied within the specified time frame. At her real estate office, Jennifer opened her package in front of two colleagues who watched her face turn white as she read that her secondary guarantee on one of Frank's emergency loans had been purchased by Morrison Capital Partners. The document included detailed asset seizure schedules and collection procedures that could destroy her professional reputation if implemented publicly. 20 minutes later, the second wave of documents arrived, comprehensive information packets about Morrison Capital Partners, including full-color photographs of our downtown office building, detailed biographies of our professional staff, and impressive statistics about our successful acquisitions and business turnarounds. This was when Frank noticed the name Kent Morrison, prominently listed as co-founder and managing partner. Frank's phone call came within minutes of his discovery. "Kent, what in God's name is this Morrison Capital Partners? What kind of sick joke are you playing?" His voice carried a combination of confusion, anger, and dawning recognition that everything he thought he understood about our family dynamic had been completely wrong. "It's not a joke, Dad," I replied calmly, speaking to him from my actual office in the downtown business district. "You said the business needed an investor, and now you have one. I'm Morrison and Sons' biggest creditor, which makes me your most important business partner, whether you like it or not." Within an hour, my entire family had converged on the Morrison and Sons office, their faces showing various stages of shock, confusion, and mounting panic. David arrived first, clutching his legal documents and demanding explanations that Frank couldn't provide. Jennifer followed, having canceled 2 client appointments to deal with what she initially assumed was some kind of elaborate legal mistake. Patricia was the last to arrive, summoned by frantic phone calls from her adult children, who needed her emotional support while processing the complete collapse of their understanding about our family relationships. She looked around the construction office like she was visiting an alien planet, struggling to connect the modest Kent she'd been taking to dinner out of charity with the successful businessman described in the Morrison Capital Partners documentation. "I don't understand any of this," Patricia said, looking directly at me as if I were a stranger wearing her son's face. "Where did you get this money? How long have you been lying to us about who you are? I never lied to anyone." I responded, maintaining the calm, professional demeanor I used during difficult business negotiations. "You all decided I was broke and struggling after my divorce. You created that narrative because it made you feel better about yourselves, and I allowed you to maintain it because it revealed your true character." Frank sputtered. "But the apartment, the old truck, the way you dress, the way what, Dad? The way I chose to live simply instead of flashing wealth around like some kind of status symbol. The way I decided that material possessions don't determine someone's worth or value. You mistook humility for poverty, because you wanted to feel superior to someone. David stood up aggressively, his insurance salesman training failing him completely in this situation. So, what happens now? You're going to destroy us over a stupid comment Tyler made at a barbecue. You're going to ruin your own family because of a joke. Tyler's comment wasn't the problem, I replied, my voice remaining steady despite the emotional intensity of the moment. The problem was that every single one of you laughed. The problem was that you've spent 2 years treating me like a burden you tolerate out of family obligation. The problem was that you've been using my supposed poverty as collateral with your creditors while mocking that same poverty at family gatherings. Jennifer began crying, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks as the full implications of our reversed relationship became clear. We didn't mean to hurt you, Kent. We thought we were being supportive. We thought you needed our help. You thought you were better than me. I corrected my words, cutting through her attempted rationalization. You enjoyed feeling superior to someone, and I was convenient for that purpose. You turned family dinners into charity events where you got to play the generous relatives helping their struggling brother. Frank tried to regain control of the conversation by appealing to traditional family hierarchies. Son, regardless of whatever success you've had, I'm still your father, and this is still our family business. We can work this out like adults without involving lawyers and legal threats. We absolutely can work this out. I agreed, surprising everyone with my willingness to negotiate. But we're going to work it out based on honest business principles rather than family manipulation tactics. You're going to decide whether you want a genuine business partnership with someone who has the resources to save Morrison and Sons, or whether you want to continue treating me like your charity project while expecting me to solve problems you created through poor management. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in 2 years, my family was forced to see me as an equal rather than someone they needed to help or fix. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and they were struggling to adapt to a reality where Kent Morrison wasn't their grateful charity case, but rather their potential business partner who held their financial future in his hands. David was the first to speak, his voice much quieter than his earlier aggressive challenge. What would a business partnership look like? What would you expect from us? First, you'd need to acknowledge what you've been doing for the past 2 years and take responsibility for how you've treated me, I replied. Second, you'd need to commit to learning proper business management instead of assuming that good intentions can replace professional competence. Third, you'd need to understand that business partnerships require mutual respect, not family hierarchy or emotional manipulation. Frank looked around the office at the legal documents scattered across his desk, the evidence of his company's financial failures, and the family members who were depending on his decisions to determine their future. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he was facing a problem that couldn't be solved through traditional family authority or emotional pressure. What happens if we can't reach an agreement? Frank asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who already understood the answer. Then, Morrison Capital Partners will exercise its rights as your primary creditor, I replied matter-of-factly. We'll initiate collection procedures, seize company assets, and potentially force bankruptcy proceedings. That's standard business practice when debtors can't satisfy their obligations. The room fell silent again as my family absorbed the reality that their financial survival now depended entirely on their ability to establish a respectful business relationship with someone they'd been treating as their charity case for 2 years. The reversal was complete. They needed me far more than I had ever needed them, and everyone understood that traditional family dynamics would no longer protect them from the consequences of their actions. As the meeting concluded, I realized that this moment represented more than just financial leverage or business opportunity. It was the first time in my adult life that my family was forced to see me exactly as I was, rather than as they needed me to be for their own emotional comfort. Whether they chose to build a genuine partnership or face the consequences of their deceptions would reveal everything about their character and their capacity for growth. 6 months after that confrontational morning in the Morrison and Sons office, I sat across from Frank in the same Denny's booth where he'd tried to manipulate me into bankruptcy. But this time our conversation was between genuine business partners rather than a desperate father attempting to exploit his son's supposed desperation. "Kent, I want to thank you for giving us a chance to prove ourselves," Frank said, his voice carrying the humility of someone who'd learned difficult lessons about leadership, honesty, and respect. "I know we didn't deserve your help after the way we treated you, but you showed us a better way to operate both as a business and as a family." The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. My initial offer to restructure Morrison and Sons rather than destroy it had required each family member to complete specific accountability exercises that forced them to confront their behavior and demonstrate genuine change rather than superficial apologies. Frank's assignment had been the most comprehensive enrolling in modern business management courses at the local community college, while working with Morrison Capital Partners consulting team to implement proper financial controls and operational procedures. At 70 years old, he'd swallowed his pride and admitted that running a construction company based on methods his father had taught him 30 years ago was no longer sufficient for modern business requirements. I was too proud to admit I needed to learn new approaches. Frank reflected, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Watching you handle this entire situation with such professionalism showed me what real leadership looks like. You had every right to destroy us, but instead you gave us opportunities to grow and improve." David's transformation had been equally dramatic but more personally challenging. After completing a construction management certification program and spending 3 months working under experienced project supervisors, he'd successfully managed 2 residential projects without cost overruns or timeline delays. The experience had taught him that enthusiasm without expertise was a recipe for expensive mistakes. "I thought I could learn construction management by jumping in and figuring things out," David admitted during one of our quarterly review meetings. "I didn't realize that my confidence was actually arrogance, and my willingness to take risks with other people's money was irresponsible. The training program taught me to respect the complexity of this industry." Jennifer's growth had focused on understanding the ethical implications of her role in the family's manipulation campaign. As part of her accountability process, she'd written detailed letters to each family member, acknowledging her participation in planning Tyler's humiliating barbecue comment and her coordination of guilt-based manipulation tactics. "I convinced myself that we were helping you by making you feel needed," Jennifer had written in her letter to me. "But I was actually helping myself feel important by participating in something that made you feel small. I used your supposed problems to make myself feel better about my own insecurities." Tyler's involvement in our family's transformation had been the most carefully managed aspect of the entire process. Rather than punishing him for delivering adults' cruel messages, I'd focused on teaching him about kindness, respect, and the difference between helping people and humiliating them. Tyler had voluntarily started working at a local food bank on weekends initially, as part of understanding what actual charity work looked like compared to his family's condescending version of helping. Within 3 months, he'd become genuinely passionate about addressing food insecurity and had organized a school fundraising campaign that collected over $2,000 for homeless services. "Uncle Kent taught me that making fun of someone for being poor is wrong," Tyler had written in his own accountability letter. "But more importantly, he showed me that being rich or poor doesn't matter as much as being kind to people. I want to be someone who helps people instead of making them feel bad about themselves." Patricia's transformation had been the most emotionally complex because it required her to examine how her need to feel important had contributed to the family's toxic dynamics. Her accountability process involved recognizing that treating me as a charity project had satisfied her desire to be needed, while allowing her to avoid addressing her own fears about aging and diminishing relevance. I enjoyed feeling like my successful son needed my help because it made me feel valuable, Patricia had acknowledged during one of our family therapy sessions. I didn't want to admit that you were doing fine without my guidance, so I created problems that required my attention. The business results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Under proper management and with adequate working capital, Morrison & Sons had completed its first profitable quarter in over 2 years. Frank's improved leadership, David's growing competence, and the financial stability provided by Morrison Capital Partners investment had transformed the company from a failing family business into a respected regional contractor. Our family's 4th of July barbecue the following year provided the perfect opportunity to measure how much had actually changed. Tyler, now 13 and noticeably more mature, helped serve food to everyone without any regard for social hierarchies or economic status. He'd developed genuine confidence based on his volunteer work and academic achievements, rather than the false superiority that came from mocking other people's struggles. The conversation topics had evolved completely. Instead of discussing my supposed financial problems or making veiled references to my need for family support, we talked about everyone's real accomplishments, current projects, and future goals. Frank described his business management coursework with genuine pride, David shared details about his latest construction project, and Jennifer discussed her expanding real estate business. Most significantly, the family had developed new traditions around acknowledging mistakes and supporting each other's growth rather than maintaining comfortable illusions. During our barbecue toasts, each person shared something they'd learned about themselves over the past year, and something they appreciated about another family member's positive changes. Frank raised his glass for his toast to Kent, who taught us that real family supports each other without keeping score, and that genuine success means lifting people up instead of putting them down. You showed us that wealth and poverty are temporary conditions, but character and kindness are permanent choices. As the evening concluded, and I helped with cleanup, I reflected on how the past year had changed not only my family's dynamics, but my own understanding of success relationships and the responsibilities that accompany privilege. My decision to acquire their debts rather than simply reveal my wealth had forced all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about power respect and the ways families can either support or undermine each other's dignity. Tyler approached me as I was loading dishes into Patricia's dishwasher, his teenage awkwardness evident as he struggled to articulate something important. "Uncle Kent, I wanted to say something about last year. I know what I said was really mean, and I'm sorry I hurt you, but I'm also grateful that you used it to help our whole family become better people." His apology contained a maturity that most adults never achieve the ability to acknowledge harm, while recognizing that consequences can lead to positive growth. Tyler had learned that words have power, that cruelty serves no constructive purpose, and that genuine strength comes from building others up rather than tearing them down. Morrison & Sons continued to thrive under our partnership structure, becoming known throughout the region for ethical practices, quality work, and fair treatment of both employees and subcontractors. Frank's management education and David's growing expertise had created a business culture based on competence and integrity, rather than family favoritism or wishful thinking. My own life had been enriched by the experience of transforming a family crisis into an opportunity for mutual growth and understanding. The modest apartment and pickup truck had served their purpose in teaching me about humility and authentic relationships, but I no longer needed those tools to maintain perspective on what really mattered in life. The final lesson had emerged gradually over months of family therapy, business meetings, and honest conversations. Respect cannot be demanded through authority or family relationships. It must be earned through consistent actions that demonstrate character competence and genuine care for other people's well-being. Our family had learned that charity without respect is actually cruelty, that helping someone requires understanding their actual needs rather than assuming their deficiencies, and that true success is measured by how we treat people who cannot immediately benefit us in return. As I drove home from that anniversary barbecue, I realized that Tyler's cruel comment had inadvertently provided the catalyst for transforming our family's entire approach to relationship success and mutual support. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as painful challenges that force us to examine our assumptions and choose better ways of connecting with the people we claim to love. The story doesn't end with revenge or destruction, but with redemption and genuine growth that benefited everyone involved. My family learned to see me as I actually was, rather than as they needed me to be, for their own comfort. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to enable their worst impulses, while providing opportunities for them to discover their best qualities. What challenges have you faced with family members who made assumptions about your circumstances or abilities? How did you handle situations where people underestimated what you were capable of achieving? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories about overcoming difficult family dynamics and finding strength through adversity. Thank you for listening to this journey of family transformation and personal empowerment. Remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's perceptions, and sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is simply showing people exactly who you really are. Share this story with anyone who might benefit from understanding that charity cases don't always need charity, and that successful people don't always announce their success to everyone around them.